Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for another edition of Thyroid Thursday, and today I want to start part one of an ongoing series on reverse T3. I'm going to call it the reverse T3 conundrum. There's a lot of discussion on blogs by medical doctors, endocrinologists, functional medicine doctors on what the real relevancy of reverse T3 is. Typically, medical doctors, endocrinologists will say that reverse T3 is irrelevant. Doesn't matter what the value is. It does no bearing in thyroid hormone treatments, and so therefore it's not important to be run. In functional medicine, you'll hear people on both sides of the fence. Some people say it makes sense to run reverse T3. Other people say it doesn't make sense to run reverse T3. There are people who are determining how much thyroid hormone to give based on reverse T3 levels. I don't know if that's appropriate, but what I want to do is I want to kind of go through some of the information that's out there and available. I think we should be running reverse T3. I don't think it should be run by itself. I don't think it's the only marker that we should be looking at when we're looking at thyroid physiology. I don't know that you can effectively determine thyroid hormone medication dose based on reverse T3, but reverse T3 is very important when it's interpreted correctly because it gives us an indication of the state of cells in regarding to the metabolism and what they want to do with thyroid hormone. So this is going to be an ongoing series. Some of these videos are going to be a little bit longer, some a little bit shorter, some a little bit more sciencey, some a little bit less. But if you bear with me, I think you'll get a lot of information out of this video series. So let's talk about what reverse T3 is. And I'll go back through a little bit of the science. I've done a number of videos on this stuff. So if you need more refresher, go back and look for some of my other videos on thyroid hormone physiology. But the thyroid gland produces two primary hormones, T4, T3. T4 is the primary hormone, T4 is the primary hormone that's made by the thyroid gland, and T3, even though it's the primary active thyroid hormone made by in the body, it is made to a much lesser degree by the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland produces about 85 micrograms per day of T4. Now think about that. Some of you are taking 50, 75, 100, 125, 150 micrograms of T4 on a daily basis. The body makes about 6.5 micrograms of T3 in the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland puts out about 6.5 micrograms of T3 on a daily basis. So this is about a 13-to-1 ratio of T4 to T3 that's produced by the thyroid gland. Now, why would the body produce primarily T4 when T3 is the active thyroid hormone? Well, what it does is it provides a reserve of T4 that's constantly available for the cells and tissues that need more thyroid hormone to upregulate the metabolism of those cells and tissues. What's really important, I'll talk about in a future video, is that the level of T4 and T3 in the blood don't necessarily correlate with the level of T4 and T3 inside cells and tissues. All the cells and tissues regulate their thyroid hormone a little bit differently based on what their needs are, their demands, what the body is asking of that tissue at that moment. So what we don't want is the muscle thyroid hormone system upregulated maybe at the same time that our GI tract metabolism is being upregulated. So the body is able to self-regulate, turn certain metabolism of certain tissues on and other tissues off so that it can control the regulation of thyroid physiology throughout the whole body. Think about it like this. If I only had one power switch to turn all the lights on in my house, my electric bill would be significant. But if I have individual switches in each room, I can control the light in each room. And to have even more control, if I put a dimmer switch on each light switch, then I really have a ton of control over the light and the electricity in my home. The body kind of does the same thing. There's bulk production of thyroid hormone, just like you have bulk energy coming into your house, but it's the individual switches that allow for me to control thyroid hormone or the light in this room and have this on and bright, but have it off in my dining room, okay? So 85 micrograms, 6.5 micrograms. Most of it's T4. This allows for a constant reserve of T4 on demand, and it allows cells to control the internal thyroid hormone metabolism. Now, once thyroid hormone gets to the cells and tissues, most of it's T4. T4 then and T3, but primarily T4 needs to be transported into the tissues. There's a number of things that can impact the transport of thyroid hormone into the tissues. I'll talk about those in another video, but for the most part, T4, the cells can do one of two things with T4. T4 can either be converted to a less active form of thyroid hormone called reverse T3. I'm going to say that reverse T3 isn't inactive. It does play some role. It can bind to some receptors, so I don't like to call it inactive. I like to call it less active. But reverse T3 is essentially what most people would refer to as an inactive form of thyroid hormone. It does not stimulate your metabolism. T4 can also be converted to T3, which is the most active thyroid hormone in the body. It's the one that pretty much drives the metabolism of the cells. These guys can both be deactivated or converted to one of four versions of something called T2, which is still, even though some people may say it's an inactive version, there are some versions of T2 that actually have metabolic effects, but that's for another time, maybe another video. And so when deiodinase 1 or deiodinase 2 acts on T4, it pulls an iodine off the outer ring of the T4, and that allows it to become T3. When deiodinase 1 or deiodinase 3 acts on T4, it pulls an iodine off the inner ring of T4, and that converts it to reverse T3. Okay, so reverse T3 is a less active form of thyroid hormone. It doesn't bind to the nuclear receptors that stimulate your metabolism. There are actions for reverse T3, but it's not what most people, it doesn't stimulate your metabolism, and there really isn't science that I've seen that shows that reverse T3 can bind to nuclear receptors and block T3 action, okay? So, your T3 production in the body, even though I said the thyroid gland only produces 6.5 micrograms, the total production in the body is 33 micrograms, 6.5 micrograms from the thyroid, but your peripheral tissues, your liver, your muscle tissue, all these peripheral tissues contribute another 26.5 micrograms, so there's a total production of about 33 micrograms of T3 per day. So the peripheral cells, the GI tract, the liver, the muscle tissue, these tissues are highly important in producing sufficient levels of T3 for the system to run appropriately. Matter of fact, the body will defend serum or plasma levels of T3. It's very rare that we'll see lab low levels of T3 because the body will actually defend T3 levels. So if blood levels of T3 are declining, the peripheral cells will actually convert T4 to T3 and push that T3 back out into the bloodstream to support T3 levels in the blood, but at the expense of causing those cells and tissues to become hypothyroid. They won't have enough T3 because they gave it up for the bloodstream, okay? Now, reduced T3 production in any given day is about 28.5 micrograms. It's pretty close to the amount of T3 that's produced in the body. The ratio between T3 and reverse T3, when you look at that, what's made, T3 that's made versus reverse T3, it's about 1.13. Important things about reverse T3, it does not stimulate metabolism, okay? It does not bind to nuclear T3 receptors. I have scoured the literature and the research. I have not seen anywhere that reverse T3 binds to T3 receptors in the nucleus, okay? What I have seen, and I've just seen it recently, is that the deiodinase 3, this enzyme that deactivates T4 and can deactivate T3, can move into the nucleus to deactivate T3 before it can bind to the nuclear receptors, but I haven't seen any science or literature showing that reverse T3 actually binds to those nuclear receptors and blocks the action of T3. I know it's talked about in functional medicine quite a bit, I just haven't seen it. And then the last thing is, reverse T3 does bind to plasma receptors to block T4 binding to those receptors. So you have cells that have a nucleus on the inside, and this is where T3 action primarily occurs. There's also receptors outside on the plasma membrane of the cell, and these are called AV beta 3 integrin receptors. T4 can bind to these receptors and create some actions inside the body. When the cell produces reverse T3, reverse T3 can bind here, blocking the actions of T4. Okay? So, reverse T3 doesn't bind here, but it can block T4 binding to these plasma membrane receptors. For many people, this is going to go over your head, but this is really important for the functional medicine practitioners that are watching these videos, because we're often telling people that reverse T3 blocks thyroid hormone actions. It really blocks the thyroid hormone actions here at the cell, at the plasma membrane, not at the nuclear membrane. One last point. What's interesting is when T4 binds to these integrin receptors, it actually increases the activity of deiodinase 3 inside the cells, which then causes T4 to be deactivated to reverse T3. So this is like a safety mechanism. When the cells don't want more T4 in them, or they're full, then what happens is T4, instead of moving into the cell, binds to the integrin receptors on the outside of the cell, which then increases deiodinase 3 to block or to break down T4 into reverse T3, so that the cells don't become hyperactive, or so the cells don't have their metabolism upregulated when they shouldn't be regulated. Okay? So, hopefully you got some benefit from this first part 1 of the reverse T3 conundrum. Stay tuned, because I'll do more of these. I'll try and keep them shorter, a little bit more tight, okay? If you have any questions, put your questions below wherever you watch these videos, and I'll be sure to answer your question. All right? Take care.